Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bible 365. I am your host, Kathy Carter, and we are going through the Bible in 1 year, so 365 days. I am using the chronological Bible reading plan from oneyearbibleonline.com. You would download that reading plan and you would join me. Today is day 159. It is June 7th, and we're going through Ecclesiastes 7 through 11:6. So if you have never been with me before, guys, I just want to give you a heads up about what we do. I read through the Bible every day using that chronological reading plan, and I just share my thoughts. I share any personal stories that I have, and then I also try and make the story make sense so you understand where we are, who is, just got a drip on me, where we are, who the author is of the book, where we are in the historical context of the entire story, why it matters, right? So the whole purpose is so we have a better foundation and a better understanding of God. If we understand God more, there is a better chance that we're going to follow him because we love him. We're going to try and honor him and do what it is that he wants us to do, which I feel like is part of the way and the reason why we are on earth. And I know one of the things that I talked about, I think it was yesterday or the day before, was like sort of our interconnectedness with each other and just a recognition that God put us all here. And this is kind of coming through in this book where he's like, this is kind of, it is what it is, right? Like this is what God made. This is how God made it. And we really need to live the best way here that we can, not through our own sort of perseverance and our own toiling, but really in the way in which God has made our life. And we need to have satisfaction and contentment and joy and happiness in all that he has given us. There's a lot of times that he says today, eat, drink, and be merry, or kind of versions or variations thereof. And I want to get into that in a little bit, but this is something that we hear quite often. I feel like it's misused and misrepresented. And I just want to talk about it a little more in the context of God. So we are in the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a book that is this teacher, which I believe is King Solomon. He calls himself a teacher. He calls himself a son of David. He calls himself a king. And so I feel like all those things combined really make sense that this is King Solomon, David's son, Solomon from Bathsheba. And this is the next person in line after King David was king. And so he has lived a life. He has been in a time of peace, a time of great prosperity. He has asked for wisdom, and so he is extremely wise, and he shares his counsel with basically everyone in the known world. They come and they visit him, and they get judgments, or they have discussions with him, or talks with him, or get situations handled by him. And so he's highly looked upon, and he's lived this life, right? One of the other things that he has done is he has married 1,000, well, he's married 700, I think. And then he has 300 concubines. So he has 1,000 women. That's a massive amount of women. And with being one man. And I'm sure some of them, other areas gave him their daughters so they can have trade with each other and all these other things. But that's not true in the case of all of them. A lot of these women were foreign women. And so these foreign women worshipped foreign gods, and they pulled Solomon away from the Lord, pulled Solomon away from the one true God. And he started making like Asherims and all these other high places and things like that for his wives to worship. And he kind of honored that in a way. And so the Lord was very angry with him, and the Lord said that he turned from him. And so then he takes his kingdom away from his son, and he's going to split it into pieces. And someone else is going to get 10 out of the 12 tribes, and then Solomon's son is going to get 1 tribe. So this is kind of where we are in his life. Like, he's still alive. He's still king. He's still wise. He's still the wisest man in the world. He's still rich. God hasn't taken anything away from him personally, but he has made a judgment on him, and there is a punishment because of what he has done. And so one of the things that we see is that he wrote 3,000 proverbs, and then he wrote more than 1,000 songs. It feels like this book, Ecclesiastes, has some of those things combined with each other. And overall, what we're finding out, Ecclesiastes, again, means that the leader of ecclesia is a church. The leader of a group of believers is somebody who kind of calls them all together. So this is Ecclesiastes. It's calling all these people together in order to share this wisdom with all of his people, all of the Israelites. And so it seems like what he's done is he's used his wisdom to kind of go out and experience anything and everything that he could possibly experience. He said he experienced wisdom, he experienced folly, he experienced madness. He looked around, he judged the world, he did all of these experiments, he did all these things, right? And then he kind of comes to some of these conclusions. And so through all of this living of life and dealing with things, he comes to a lot of conclusions, and overwhelmingly his conclusions kind of are God made the world, God made the world, and we need to enjoy our place in it. God has given us a job, he's given us things to do, and that's kind of what we do. Which, in some ways to me, I feel like it sounds like he's given up or that he's lost hope. And today, yesterday, I was kind of all in. I was really excited and things really opened up to me. And today, I'm finding myself definitely a little bit more frustrated because it feels like he's speaking from this experience and he's kind of saying it doesn't matter. I don't think that's what he's saying. I don't think that's what we got yesterday. I don't know what we're going to get tomorrow. But today, it feels sort of in this place where he's like, oh, well, it is what it is, what it is, what it is, right? Which is, in some ways, it depends how you take that statement, right? So if you take that statement and say, it is what it is, what it is, right? Therefore, I'm just going to kick back because if God wants me to do it, he's going to make it happen, right? Like I don't believe that that's what God is asking. I think if God was asking that, he wouldn't have given us any, first of all, Solomon wouldn't have given us any of those Proverbs, right? Because Solomon would have believed that, like, who cares if you're a sluggard? If you're a sluggard and you were meant to be a sluggard, then God made you a sluggard, right? So I don't think that's what he's saying. I do think that he's in a position where he's like, you can't change the world. And I may have shared some of this yesterday, but there's definitely some truth in that for me, where, like, in the positions that I've held and in the places where I've been in my life, and I'm sure maybe this is probably true for everybody, I want to change a lot of things, right? Like I lead kids in school. I help in school. I'm an assistant essentially. And I want these kids to do better, right? Like I don't want them to just go, well, it is what it is. This is my lot in life and I don't want to work any harder. And I want them to change, and I want them to desire more for themselves, right? Like as much for themselves as I desire for them. And I could sit back and I could go, man, I make no changes. I should quit my job. I should go do something else because this job obviously isn't meant for me. Or I could kick back and I could go, this is what the Lord has given me, right? And he says to do all in honor of him. And yet, whatever happens is what happens, right? As long as I'm honoring the Lord, whatever happens in that circumstance and situation is what happens in that circumstance and situation, right? Like God is the judge. God is the one that rules over. And so those things are what they are. And then, of course, we always have power over ourselves as well, right? Like, so we all make choices. And sometimes we make choices that aren't very good for us. So I'm hoping that might help a little bit before we dig in, because when we dig in, I'm going to be in some weird places. There's some weird places, weird things going on. So going to this, it is June 7th. And again, I'm in Ecclesiastes. And so it starts with Ecclesiastes 7:1. And I just want to start it right away because if this is sort of like, these feel a little bit like Proverbs, this section. It says, a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. It's better to go to a house of mourning than go to a house of feasting. So a good name is better than fine perfume. Obviously, it's about what will people say about you. Well, I shouldn't say obviously. This is what I deem when I read it. What will people say about you, right? Like, does your name live in infamy, so to speak? Is there an importance to the way that you are that people will recognize it, right? And it is a good name, right? It is not, it's not where they're cursing you or saying anything bad about you. It's better than the next few. I find a little bit interesting, right? It's better. This is kind of like all the it's better thans. It's better to go to a house of mourning than a house of feasting. Frustration is better than laughter. The heart of the wise in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fool is in the house of pleasure. It's better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of a fool. So all these are like it's better thans. And so these are the things that, again, I feel like is us. Here we go, where he's like lamenting sort of like it is what it is, what it is, but then he gives us all these things about what I feel like we should be doing, right? Like, so it says frustration is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of pleasure. So like wisdom comes from the house of mourning, and maybe that's true. Like maybe the reality is when we're finding all of this pleasure and all these things that we joyfully take pleasure in, we're not growing or getting wiser in any of those things, right? We're just sort of getting our needs fulfilled, and so we're not really growing in any of those areas. But then it says the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. And then in the verse 8, it says the end of a matter is better than the beginning. Patience is better than pride. Don't be quickly provoked in your spirit. And then verse 10, it says, do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. So he doesn't say that the old days are better than these. He says, don't ask yourself that, which, by the way, I am in a lot of ways the queen of this. If you guys have been following me for any amount of time, you know that I'm like, this generation, this generation, this generation. And I kind of feel in this generation, because I'm in it a lot. Like I have kids in this generation, obviously, and then I work in a system with kids. And so I get really frustrated and I'm like, oh, if only they were in the older generation. And he's saying that that's not wise. Like sort of maybe this idea of like going backwards isn't wise. So in all things, like no matter where you are now, it's better to go forward and then maybe try and make changes as you're going forward instead of going, oh, it was so much better back then. We're not going to go back then, right? Like we don't even have the ability to go backwards. We only have the ability to go forward. So sort of like lamenting about what it used to be like and how you wish it would still be. It's not going to be. There is no going backwards. It's only moving forward. And then he follows in verse 13, consider what God has done. So this is, again, this area where I'm like, it's kind of like it is what it is. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. God has made one as well as the other. So like if you're in a bad place, God made that. If you're in a good place, God made that. Right? So it's not about that. Therefore, and then no one can discover anything about their future, which he mentions again later. All right. And then in verse 15, he starts out with, in this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these things. This is one of those age-old questions again. The righteousness perishing in their righteousness, and the wicked living long in their wickedness. Do not be over righteous, nor be over wise. Why wouldn't we desire to be those things? Do not be over wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. And so this is, it feels like a call to, again, what I've been kind of talking about is sitting back and having patience, right? Like not venturing to be too far over in this direction or too far over in that direction, to kind of settle and calm yourself a little bit more in the middle. I still question, like, don't be over righteous. I don't know. I still question it. It seems like there's a couple things in here which really throw me off. Verse 21, I think, was a great one. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you have cursed others. Don't worry about what anyone says about you. You've definitely done this, right? Like you can say you're a gossip, not a gossip. There have been times where you have been angry and you have said something about someone and you're so worried about what somebody's saying about you. Oh my gosh, I can't believe they said that about me. You're so hurt that someone said something about you. Maybe it was the same as you. They were in a time of frustration where they feel like they were hurt by you. And so they're saying something bad about you, right? You have done the same. So this is kind of that one of those calls to recognize another, right? So just recognizing that in yourself before you kind of pull that and freak out on another that's doing that. Verse 23, he says, all this I tested by wisdom. And I said, I'm determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. And then here we go in verse 26. This is kind of my area where I'm having a hard time. So again, I said it in the beginning, I'm saying it again. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. These women worshiped other gods. A lot of them were foreign. They worshiped other gods. He turned away from God because of these women. Now, I'm going to say because of these women, but I'm also going to say because of himself, right? And God recognizes, like, he turned because of these women, but he turned. He's the one, his child is going to be the one that gets punished because of his turning. So he says, I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. So what he's saying is he finds, like, one of the worst things, more bitter than death, is a woman who's going to trap you and kind of turn you away, right? Like, because you're sinning and you're going to trap you. The way to avoid this, right, is to turn towards God. The man who pleases God will not, has a possibility of, but will escape her. So if you're pleasing God and you're doing the things that God considers righteous, then you will escape the woman who is a snare. So there's your sort of defense against any of these things that you say. All right. He goes down and says, look, says the teacher, this is what I discovered. He said, while I was still searching but not finding, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found: God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. So he's out and about and he's looking around and he's like, man, everybody's a mess. This expression where he says, I found one among 1,000, but I found none in women. I want to tell you guys that this is an expression. That what he really means is it's almost impossible to find. But I don't know for sure. I don't know if he's being literal. And so I want to keep it open that there's a possibility, right? Because he said he's gone out and he's done all of these things. There's a possibility he's being very literal, which of course is disturbing, because I would go, of course there are righteous women, right? Like, even to say that, like, I personally know in this day and age, God-fearing women. Is he talking about his own life? Is he talking about the women that he's married to? Right? Like, so he's looking out and he's like, man, I made all of these Asherahs and, all these women have turned me away from the Lord. I'm not really sure. So I got to wrestle with that a little bit, because I find it to be a little frustrating, right? Because I don't want someone to walk away and go, wow, women are all evil. I don't think that's what he's trying to say, but I'm not sure. And so it's something I got to deal with. Verse 8, or chapter 8, verse 1, he says, who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face, and it changes its hard appearance. So again, this is an area where we should be seeking wisdom. And I think he's calling out for us to be seeking wisdom, even though he's like, folly, folly, all the world, whatever. Here he comes down to obeying the king. He says, obey this. So in another area where I want to question, obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, what are you doing? Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm. And then it kind of moves on from there. Is this very specific to Solomon? Is this very specific to a king that's following the Lord? Does this count for all of us as those of us who follow the Lord? Right? Again, this is an area I'm not too sure. So I want to take into account that this is Solomon. He's writing to the Israelites. He's speaking to the Israelites. He is king on the throne at this time. Is he talking about himself? And he's like, so, or is this just that he says, is it just that he says, because you took an oath before God, right? Is it because the Israelites took this oath to follow Solomon as God's king, right? So is it about the people's oath more than it's about the king? And then again, how does that translate to us? Here it goes down in, moving down in 8, is he's starting to compare the wicked and the righteous. So if I go to verse 12, he says, although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. because it's, again, he's talking about like, you're going to live this certain amount of life, the wicked's going to live this certain amount of life, whatever, no big deal. And then here he goes in verse 15. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there's nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat, drink, and be glad. So again, I fight that a little bit. I fight it. Is that really true? Like, are we just supposed to eat, drink, and be merry all the time? And maybe the answer is yes, but maybe that answer only can come with your contentment with the Lord, right? And I'm sure you're going to ask, like, where am I getting that from? But he constantly says things about following the Lord. And so, or being wise, right? Having wisdom, but not so much wisdom that you're kind of like involved in your own wisdom. And so he seems to be pointing consistently to the Lord. And so there's something in our hearts that needs to commit itself to this contentment and joy in the Lord and exactly where we are in our lives. Because again, he starts talking about death all the time. In verse 9, right, or in chapter 9, verse down in 2, he says, all share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean. So clean and unclean means the Israelites and then the non-Israelites. Those who offer sacrifices and those who don't. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. As it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. We're all going to die. Verse 5, the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. So go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart. Here we go. For God has already approved of what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. This is where I'm going to say he's saying this is about God. Right? This is about staying in relationship with God. This is about being content with God, right? So I'm going to follow through and say, this is what he's talking about here. And then in verse 12, he says, moreover, no one knows when their hour will come, right? People are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. So the next chapter, or the next kind of, it does go into chapter 10, but the next section in this is, he says, I also saw under sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. So he's talking about wisdom. And then he follows up in chapter 10 with some interesting statements. So 10:1, he says, as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. So like a fly is gross and you can smell the death of the fly over top of the perfume. Folly is gross and you can and people outweigh that over wisdom and honor. So I think he's talking about what is, not what should be. This is sort of like just a recognition of what is, because I would say both examples are kind of unpleasant. But he's saying so to recognize that, right? Like, we don't really honor wisdom and honor over folly. A lot of times we honor folly over that, or we enjoy folly over that. Going down to verse 8, it says, whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. So just being careful of all the things that you do. So again, this is going maybe into Proverbs. This is some Proverbs. Not sure how this fits into the folly of the world in which he's speaking. All right, chapter 10. Nope, verse 10. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. So I feel like this one kind of went back to a little bit of a word of wisdom, right? Like, it's important to have skill in anything and everything we do. So the sharpest tool won't necessarily matter unless you have skill. All right, in verse 19, I just wanted to go back a little bit because it says, verse 19, a feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. Except in chapter 5:8, he says something totally different. In 5:8, he says, it's the futility of wealth. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. So how can these two things be in together? And I'm going to say the point maybe is that money technically is the answer for everything, but we can't worship and adore it. So you do get some joy out of having money, but we're not supposed to make that the most important thing in our lives. So we have to find that delicate balance. This is where I say, like, I get why he's so frustrated, right? Like, how can all of these things be true? Give me a checklist, for crying out loud. Tell me what's good, tell me what's bad, so I can follow those things. And then I know that I'm going to heaven in the end. And here he's kind of like, yeah, money's the answer for everything. Don't love money, but you need money for everything. So eat, drink, and be merry. Because wherever you are is wherever you are, right? Like, it's just like these wraparounds are very exhausting. And then verse 20, he says, do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say. Just to be careful about leadership. And again, does this come to us today? I'm not really sure. I don't know if this is, and we're going to kind of hear more about these things in the New Testament. We're going to hear more about like following the laws and what that means as somebody who believes. But in this, I don't know if it's very specific to the people of Israel, right? This is a leader. Again, I've talked on many occasions how the church and the state in some ways were combined, right? So Israel was both a people group and a religion, and so all of it was combined into each other. The high priest sought out the king, and the king sought out the high priest, and all of their answers and all of their ways. Moving on down to 11, this is our last chapter, and these are just essentially verses about life. Verse 3, if clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where it falls, there it's going to be. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. So like if you're looking up and you're just watching, you're not going to plant because you're going to be watching. And whoever looks at the clouds won't reap. These are kind of just facts. Sow seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Again, it's a little tough for me because he's like, go out and work, right? Don't look at the clouds. Don't stare at stuff. Don't make sure that you're working and you're doing the things that you're supposed to do. But then he's saying, this is your lot in life, right? Don't toil too hard. This is something that I want to continue to work through. I feel like I've probably left a lot of things unanswered. There are things unanswered for me. And so I'm hoping by the end we get this. But overwhelmingly, it really seems like he's saying to trust God and trust God, get comfortable, be patient. And that's the life that we have to live here on earth, right? And just to follow the Lord. So I made it sound like it's not a good thing. It is. If we find contentment and peace in that, I think that that's the best thing that we could do for our lives. So if this was a blessing, which I hope it was, even in my kind of openness and surrendering some of this, if you found this a blessing, I want you to like it, share it, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you get notifications all the time. And I will see you guys next time. In the meantime, keep reading.